All right, he's the author of Behind the Bench, Inside the Minds of Hockey's Greatest Coaches. He is a legendary Atlanta Thrashers reporter. And also, like, a million other things, too. The one and only Craig Custance, finally, he's on the show. It's nice to have you, Craig.
Oh, it's nice. It's great to be here. I like that my Thrashers coverage is what leads the description. That's really that's what I'm most proud of.
You covered them right out of town.
No. To be fair, I covered them right into the playoffs.
Oh, wow! There you go.
And then out of town. Actually, I left before they did. I believe.
Wow. So they followed you.
Yeah, I think that was like, if I'm gone, like, why exist?
Exactly.
That's true. I look at it.
All right. Enough about this Thrasher stuff. First things first. Why did you drug Drew Doughty, and how did you get him to say all those things about the Leafs? Like, did he lose his mind or what?
Oh my gosh, Drew Doughty's the best. So I'm sitting there, and I'm like, I'm wondering if he'll even go down this path. Like, I knew it's 50-50. I'm going to ask him about free agency in a year and a half, and he's going to go, oh, I'm not thinking about that at all. All I care about is tonight's game. Or he's going to go, the route he did. And the second, 10 seconds into it, he goes, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. And I'm like, oh yeah, here we go. We're going down this path. And he was great. In fact, I ended up running most of the interview on my podcast, The Full 60. So if you just want to listen to the raw tape of it, it's on there. And then we're done. And I shut off the recorder and I go, Drew, I'm like, you realize this is just going to be this is going to be craziness from here on out. And he smiles. He's like, oh yeah, I don't care. This is fun for me. And I'm like, all right, we're good here.
So you did him a huge favor. You gave him an out and he still went with it, eh?
Well, he was just, Drew doesn't care. Drew, he's very confident person. He's, one of those guys who's very comfortable in his own skin. So, and look, I'm glad he did it. Not, for a lot of reasons. One,
obviously.
Selfishly. Yeah, right. But this notion that hockey players have to constantly be like, I'm going to do what's best for the team, and I want to be loyal to the team that drafted me. I'm glad that a guy's like, no, I'm going to do what's best for myself. And he owes the Kings nothing, and Erik Karlsson owes the Senators nothing. These guys have bled for those teams, and just because those are the teams that happen to draft them, I don't think there should be any loyalty there.
Well, and that's the thing, is that you've got a player who clearly deserves it, saying it. I don't think anybody would question it if LeBron says it. But it's funny because the hockey culture has always been so different, and I think a lot of the time on this show, we've talked about the fact that that's part of the marketing problem, is that they don't have a brash personality to come out and say, okay, I want to make a pile of money. And you know what? I would give Drew Doughty a pile of money. I just would. Why not?
Yeah, he's deserved it. And that's what I was talking about with someone afterwards. I'm like, because it blows up and everyone's talking about it, I'm like, if this had been another sport, people would have been like, oh, good player wants to get paid a lot of money. This is a non-story. Mm-hmm. But the fact that it's hockey and it's someone's actually, saying what he should be saying, then it became this huge deal.
Now, did he get any blowback for that? Do you know? Because Karlsson made his comments and management got all upset, and then they asked him for his list.
No way.
You wouldn't dare say it.
He seems measured.
Cantankerous owner was cantankerous. No, but Karlsson said it, and it became this big thing. Now maybe I've got my Canadian goggles on, and that's the reason. But did Doughty get any blowback for this, in the media or internally?
No, and I think that's. That's probably an indication more of where he plays than what he said. If Drew Doughty was in Ottawa and he said this, I think we're probably still talking about it. And I saw this happen in Atlanta, and a lot where something would be a story and it had at most a 24-hour cycle with the hockey team in Atlanta because they just moved on to things they were more interested in. And who wouldn't it was a story in, hockey markets. I'm not even sure it was a story in LA, that Drew Doughty said this. And wow. I think there was probably some follow. I think the media there followed it. And I want to say somebody talked to Rob Blake and he was like, whatever, there's kind of the natural job you do as reporters on your beat. But I haven't seen any blowback on Drew Doughty.
Now, I have a question for you. Because Erik Karlsson is also featured in that article. With and by the way, The Athletic is where you find that. That's where Craig works now. Were you surprised that Erik Karlsson was willing to talk about it?
Yeah, I guess. So I wasn't there for Erik Karlsson. So it was Drew Doughty. I talked.
He
to
called
him,
Erik, right? He said he was going to call Erik. Yeah.
Yeah. He kind of independently mentioned Erik Karlsson and said, "Yeah, I'm going to text him," and I found that fascinating because I'm like. And I'm even wondering, are we allowed to do that? Is this like some sort of opposite of collusion or whatever? And I'm wondering, and so then the Ottawa media at that point kind of naturally followed it up with Erik Karlsson, and I think on some level, and maybe I'm over analyzing, which I'm always guilty of doing. I'll throw that out there, but my guess is I think Drew Doughty gave him the green light to say. I don't know if you want to be the first guy out to say this if you're Erik Karlsson, but the fact that Drew Doughty already said it, then you can come out and say, yeah, I'm not giving any discounts. We're doing this.
Wow. It was a paradigm shift. And you can argue that it's funny, the Ottawa Senators 40 games ago were in the Western Conference Finals or Eastern Conference Finals. And are now talking about relocation. They're talking about trading their star player. It's amazing literally 6 months ago, this was a completely different conversation. And it's amazing what one sequence of events leads to because, Drew Doughty talking about Erik Karlsson brought up the conversation of how are we going to re-sign Karlsson in 2019, brought up the financial issues the team is having, Eugene Melnyk getting into the public's eye and saying right before the game starting, on the Friday night before their outdoor game going, if it becomes bad here, I'm going to have to move the team or I'm going to sell the team or whatever. This all stemmed from that one article.
Well, let's call this what it is. He covered the Thrashers and they left. And now he's trying to get the Sens to leave too. This is all Craig's fault. He's making this happen on purpose.
Damn it, Craig. Damn it.
Oh my gosh.
Don't ever come to the
I did get a text from a GM that was along those lines. He's like, great work. You're ruining the Senators. And I'm like, no, I just held my microphone out. This is, let's not overthink this here.
Do you have a sense?
Although I say this, I am looking. So I called John Chaika yesterday because the third piece to the puzzle of all of this is Oliver Ekman-Larsson.
Yeah.
And so now I'm like, well, we might as well keep the wave going. So I called him and I'm like, I'm not really trying to stir the pot here, although I kind of am, but we're all talking about Doughty and Karlsson. Maybe this is the guy that's most likely to leave because he's in not a great situation. And sadly, John Chaika, unlike Drew Doughty, did not take the bait and, kind of stuck to the company line of we're confident we're going to sign him and all that.
Good move.
Yeah.
I guess. Not good for subscriptions to The Athletic.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because people have been ripping on John Tortorella recently for his very short press conferences. And I'm like, okay, if you're a reporter covering the team, I totally get why you're mad. But looking at John Tortorella's resume of flipping shit, I think maybe it was actually a very mature decision not to say anything. How much do you talk about him in your book, Transition?
Yeah, so that was a pretty good segue. My thoughts on that, because I heard somebody saying the same thing, kind of taking a run at John Tortorella, saying, boy, is he that burn up over a game in December that he can't do his job and give quotes to the media? I can tell you, as a member of the media, I'm way rather have him do that than come out and say, hey, we got to try better next time, get pucks in deep or whatever, because now I've got a story. The fact that the head coach that I'm covering stormed off and was that upset about this game,
exactly,
he just made my job way easier. So, don't do anything on behalf of the media here. If you want to storm off, by all means, do it. And it was interesting because he does that, and a few people that had read my book kind of were on Twitter saying, hey, if you want to know why he did that, go read the John Tortorella chapter in Craig's book. And just to kind of give your listeners an idea, I sat down with 10 coaches in the game. We watched game film together, spent a lot of time talking to everybody around them. And in John Tortorella's case, the conversation, because it was kind of an older, we were watching the Tampa Bay Lightning beat the Flames and to win a Stanley Cup. It was an older game, so we ended up talking more about him and his career and basically his relationship with the media, why it went sideways in Vancouver, and why he has the reputation he has. Because at one point in the conversation, I'm like, John, I got to be honest. Like, I wasn't crazy about the hire in Columbus. It was, I thought they spun the pendulum way too far the other direction in terms of going from a player's coach to kind of a hard liner. And in my opinion, was really shaped on what I'd seen from John Tortorella through the years in these press conferences. And he did a great job. He really opened up on why he is that way and how he's trying to work on that. And it was a really fascinating conversation.
What do you think you learned about the way, because we even heard it last year. Columbus was the number one team in the NHL for a good chunk of the season, and they still had to sit him down and go, listen, John, closed door meeting, you need to relax. You need to bring it down a couple Tortorella decibels here. What did you learn about him in particular? Because he is a fascinating figure in hockey. He's had success, and then he's had total failure too. And so it's kind of like it's extremes with him.
So I learned so much. And making it even more interesting, that chapter, it's Mike Sullivan and John Tortorella, and we all sat down together in a room. We watched Mike Sullivan's Penguins beat the Sharks to win a cup, and then Mike had to leave to catch a flight, so then it was just John and I. And so it was interesting to watch the two, because they're really close friends. It was interesting to watch the two of them interact. So when Mike Sullivan, who's still, we're watching a game at the time that had just happened, so he's still very close to the situation. And so he's, kind of watching his words. And John would just pipe in and be like, Mike can't say this about Sidney Crosby, but I can. And here's what we all thought of Sid. And he would kind of say the things that, maybe Mike was thinking. And what was interesting about John was it became this almost like a psychoanalysis of why he is the way he is. And the two things that I found most interesting, one is how intentional he is about introducing conflict. And it's all very planned, especially with his players. And so he just said, if he senses something's happening, he's throwing it out there, and he's introducing conflict to the team, and he's doing it out front of everybody. And because his thought process is, if there's a problem right now and we don't deal with it, and I don't light a fire under it, it's just going to fester and get worse and worse. And so he's consciously introducing conflict into the dressing room because he feels like that's the way to keep a healthy dressing room. And then the other thing I learned was I just assumed John Tortorella is the way he is because he just doesn't care what any of us think, right? Like he just, he snaps at reporters because who cares what, the public thinks or the fans think. And, there was a moment where I'm like, well, do you really care what the perception of you is? And he's like, I do. He's like, I'm a human being. And because I think there is the public perception of John Tortorella doesn't align exactly with what he really is. And he'll be the first to admit it's by his own doing. But it was interesting for me to hear that, like, he actually does care that maybe people don't see him the way he is.
I want to go back to the introduction to conflict thing. Was there anything he did in recent memory that I guess was after your interviews where you just go, yep, textbook John? Because I'm trying to think, who was it who he sat recently and it was a shock? Wasn't it like Cam Atkinson?
Cam Atkinson. Oh, without talking to John, I'm sure that's an example of it. I'm sure that was calculated. In Cam Atkinson, you have a guy who signs this huge long-term contract, is getting paid, maybe, and again, this is just trying to read the tea leaves, maybe he's like, okay, I want to send this message right now that he can't just sit on his laurels here and play out this deal. Like this, you've done nothing yet. And he's just not afraid to stir the pot. And one of the interesting stories, and it was easier to tell Tampa Bay Lightning stories because so much time had passed. And, we all remember the battles with Vinny Lecavalier. And he said one of the things he learned in those battles was he would sit down with Vinny and have these very private battles, and they're FUs back and forth or whatever it is. Like they're like, or at least it was one-sided FUs, and like there was no progress being made there. And he said it wasn't until I started doing it in front of the whole team, essentially embarrassing his best player,
humiliating
in front of the whole team.
Yeah,
and that he felt like he was making any progress because the other players are like, okay, it's not just him railing on me. He's doing this now on the best player, and he felt like that was some sort of turning point. And I'm like, man, you're playing with fire here because you lose Vinny or you lose Brad Richards in this equation, you're done. Like I don't care how good X's and O's coach you are. And he's like, no, he's like, you're exactly right. And I'm sure he's lost players. But what I found interesting was then when you trace it, so he's challenging them, he's calling them out, and they're having these battles, and ultimately they win a Stanley Cup. And then he goes to New York, and if you look at how many of those former players that he battled with, Brad Richards goes to New York, Dangle goes to New York, Dan Boyle goes to New York. He said Vinny wanted to go to New York, and that to me shows you can do these things and still have the respect to your players. And I think, and this is a really long answer, but I think he can do it because on some level they know it's not about him, and that's the one thing I'll give John credit for. Like, he's not doing this because he's like an egomaniac. He's doing it because he's trying to get the most out of his players and win hockey games. Like, his motivations are very pure here, and I think once the players realize that, they're willing to put up with it.
That's really, really interesting.
Long answer, but a good one.
One of a mystifying and almost legendary already figure in Toronto is Mike Babcock. And I know he is in Detroit, and I know he was in Anaheim. Very clearly, if not the best, one of the best coaches in the world. I think the best coach in the world. What did you learn about Mike? And what can you tell us about the way he's coaching the team this year that makes sense?
Because we're having trouble learning anything.
Yeah.
So I would tell you, and this is very self-promotion of me, but if you do nothing else in hockey, I guess that's why I'm here. No, I don't want to chat with you guys, but if you do nothing but buy this book just to read the Mike Babcock chapter, I promise, I think it's worth the $16 or whatever it is, but $10 on Amazon right now. It's like he was so good in terms of articulating his theories on not only coaching but on basically how to live your life. And we had two very lengthy conversations even before we sat down and watched. We ended up watching the gold medal, the 2010 gold medal game, Canada-US, and which was unbelievable. But Mike, he's so passionate about kind of personal improvement and getting out of your comfort zone and what it really takes to achieve great things in life. And I ended up talking to people, not just in hockey, but that went to school with them or that were close buddies with them, to really trying to get at what makes Mike tick. And you can see how his influence on them. And one guy talked about going for a job with Mike, and essentially, he wasn't happy in his job as a lawyer, but he had a good salary and a pension. And Mike's like, what are you doing if you're not passionate about what you're doing? And basically encouraged him to quit his job. And now he's got this really successful business of his own that never would have happened if Mike hadn't lit a fire under him. And that's just Mike. Like he essentially, and I think on some level, going through this process of doing this book it contributed to me walking away from a really good contract offer at ESPN to go to The Athletic, because you just saw these coaches that were pushing people to be uncomfortable to achieve great things. And I think that's the essence of Mike Babcock.
The second you brought up sitting down with Mike Babcock to watch the 2010 gold medal game, my first thought was Mike is definitely still mad they blow a 2-0 lead. Because he's such a perfectionist.
It's true.
One thing I keep saying about Babcock is I think a really underrated, underutilized thing, even in this market, in such a Leaf-obsessed, media-savvy market, people don't watch his press conferences enough, because I never, ever, ever get the impression he's being dishonest. You talked about Mike Sullivan kind of choosing his words carefully. Did you ever get a moment that Babcock was ever trying to hide something?
No, I don't think he's dishonest. I do think he's very calculated. Mm-hmm. And the example he gave, so it's there's two chapters for your Toronto fans. It's probably the back-to-back chapters are Ron Wilson, and we watch the same game. So I'm watching it from the American perspective with Ron in his place in South Carolina, and then I go to Mike's summer home to watch the Canadian perspective. And one of the things, and I did Ron Wilson first, and one of the things that Ron essentially said was, nobody will ever win in Toronto. Obviously he was frustrated from his tenure, but the distraction's too much. You're getting piled on in the media. He's like, I didn't handle it well. And I raised that with Mike, and he's like, who obviously disagrees. And he's like, but you also have to be smart about it. And one of the examples he used, and I love the story, is he's like, we had played this awful game, gotten blown out, and there was that story on Twitter about Mark Masters. His wife was in coach, and he got upgraded to first class.
Yeah.
And everybody, do you guys remember that? Like he got sent to, what do we call it, the Cal car or whatever.
The birth of Masters Nation.
Exactly. So that's that's what we're all talking about on Twitter, because we're all we're easily distracted. And Mike sees this and leads off his press conference with kind of a shot at Masters, kind of this joke, and everyone's laughing. And people are talking about that. And everyone's tweeting out how Mike Babcock is making light of this or whatever it is, and that becomes a conversation. And he's like, "Okay, off you go." And he's like, "You guys just want something to talk about." And so he's like, "I was very conscious to control, rather than the team getting blown out the day before. Here's a little something else to talk about."
Wow. So it's about controlling the message, directing the message.
Yeah, and it was funny because Ron's attempt to do that was, he said he would have a team, whoever was, I forgot who he said it was, somebody who worked for the Leafs would kind of lead off with the softball question, and
Paul Hendrick.
He would try to, maybe it was Paul, and he would try to kind of have that be the conversation. And if that's not what you're writing about through competing media, then that's probably not going to work really effectively. Whereas Mike, I think he understands, like, sometimes if you can make it interesting enough, you can do it effectively.
Todd McClellan's having a rough year, along with the Edmonton Oilers, and he's one of the guys you profile in this book. And it's not like Todd McClellan all of a sudden became a bad coach. There just seems to be it just seems to be disjointed in Edmonton right now, and it will probably rebound because the talent's there. What do you think about his style? What did you learn about him, and what do you think he needs to do from his perspective to try to turn things around there? Yeah,
Todd's an interesting one. So, I concede in the book that I cheated a little bit to get him in here, because every other coach was either in this huge moment, like they were all Stanley Cup winners or playing for a gold medal, and then there's Todd McClellan, who I believe is a really good coach, and I really wanted him in there, and I used that World Championships game as when Sid joined the Triple Gold Club a couple years ago in Prague, and that became kind of our game to talk about. And really, it was an excuse to talk to Todd, because I think he's that next generation who, what he's really good at is communicating to his younger players why they have to do what they do. And I think there's, some coaches that are like, here's what we're doing, and let's just do this. And I think Todd's really good at articulating the why, and that helps with the generation of players now that isn't, that's pushing back. And what are we doing this for? And if you listen to a Todd McClellan practice, you can just hear him. He's so loud, he's barking it out, but you can hear him explaining the situations, where this is going to come into play, why we're doing this drill very specifically. And then I think that helps these players kind of zone in and focus on what they have to focus on. And so I think that communication and being very black and white, and his ability to kind of have that back and forth with young players is one of his strengths.
Did Sidney Crosby write the foreword to your book?
He did.
How did that come about?
So, he's a good player. I think that's
no, but it's pretty cool when Sidney Crosby is like endorsing your book, Craig. That's it.
I know he's a good player. He's not going to write the foreword to mine, Craig.
How do you get the greatest hockey player in the world to write a foreword?
I feel like I'm talking to Lou Lamoriello. Answer the question.
Whoa. Austin Matthews didn't write his foreword. It's Sidney Crosby. Okay. Second best player in the world. Anyway.
It's all right. So basically, there's, we were talking about who should do the forward, and there was 4 chapters where Sid ended up being a pretty prominent discussion point. So it leads off with Dan Bilesman in Sid's first cup. Then you have Mike Babcock, and Sid obviously scoring the overtime goal against the Americans. Then he goes to Prague, and it's Todd McClellan, and he's a central part of that success for Hockey Canada. And then it's Mike Sullivan in the most recent, and his cup in Pittsburgh. So when I was trying to find somebody, I didn't want another coach that was like, okay, here's a coach that I'm squeezing in here in this way. Although I almost did that. I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense to do Sid, and now I just have to convince him to do it. And I approached CAA, his agent, and said, here's what I'm doing. It's done. The legwork's done. I've got all these coaches. They talk pretty glowingly about your client. I just thought it would be cool to be incredibly long, and I'll work with them on it. And kind of held my breath. And I remember getting a call back, it was around Thanksgiving a couple of years ago. And it was like, yeah, Sid'll do it. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Wow.
It was completely like, I'm like, okay. And so, but then it was just logistics, right? So then, he doesn't want to do it during the season. And I'm like, of course not. Then my book was due. I turned in my manuscript on, this is like really inside baseball, or whatever, on New Year's Eve last year, so almost a year ago. And they wanted, the publisher wanted the thing in January from Sid, and I'm not gonna bother him in the middle of the season.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, look, we can give him all the time we want, or we can get somebody else. And they were great about it. And they're like, no, let's wait. It's Sidney Crosby. And I'm like, well, hopefully they lose early in the playoffs, and we'll have a lot of time.
Yep, nope.
Nope. And that's not how it played out. And so, the playoffs are dragging, and we literally get to the last day that we basically had to go to plan B. And, again, I'm like, hey, if he has to punt, we'll punt. And they're like, no, Sid's in. It's just, he just won a cup and he wants to go on vacation. All very reasonable things. And finally, it's like, okay, we're down to the last day. And then it was like, okay, let's do this. And of course, and then once Sid does it, it's great. Like, he is. It's like, here it is, and it's perfect. And
that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm going to get Sidney Crosby to write the foreword to my book, because he's a pretty good player.
Totally
I should get Austin Matthews.
Yeah, he can.
I mean, come on, he's not busy. I'll cheer against the Leafs in the playoffs like Craig. Now that I know the recipe for success.
Yeah, Craig, I hope you're ready for all of Pittsburgh to hate you.
Well, I mean, maybe I reverse changed them. Who knows?
Right.
I really wanted them out. And I was so that. Again, this is really insider. So that was right after ESPN laid everybody off. So I'm the last kind of hockey writer standing at that point. And so I got assigned, and ESPN, they love Sidney Crosby. So they're like, you're on the Penguins beat. So I'm like rooting, kind of like want this to end, but I'm also there every day. And I'm like, I want to go home, and I know I'm changing jobs soon to the Athletic. It was this really weird time where I'm like, all I needed is the Penguins to lose. And of course, every, magical run and I'm like, they're not even that good. Like, I'm on TV and I'm like, okay.
What? Ron Hainsey is a top pairing defenseman, okay? He's shown that in Pittsburgh and Toronto now.
And of course, Sid just willed him as he has done.
Yeah, absolutely. Craig, we could sit here and talk to you for hours, but we don't want to spoil your entire book. There are some unbelievable names. You've got Claude Julien, you've got Joel Quenneville, you've got Dan Bilesma, you've got Ken Hitchcock, and obviously the forward from Sidney Crosby. We'd like to talk to you again. You could promote your book again if you'd like, but we'd just like to, get your insight on things. Before we go, though, we didn't get to this question before we transitioned into the book, and I have been dying to ask.
See, that's my fault.
No, it's okay.
Never let me run with it.
No, man, it's good. Oliver Ekman-Larsson.
Yes.
3 options. He resigns, he leaves in trade, he leaves in free agency. What do you think's the most likely?
See, I'm kind of influenced, having just talked to the GM, who was fairly convincing, but I'm going to say he leaves in trade. Because, not sooner rather than, I think they're going to wait it out, because John Chaika made a good point. He's like, what are you doing if you're rebuilding? You're trying to get a number one, and whether that's a number one center or a number one defenseman. And he's like, we've been rebuilding a long time in Arizona, and we've gotten one of them, Oliver Ekman-Larsson. So he's like, I'm not eager to deal with this guy. Like, I'm telling GMs no. But ultimately, I just look at it from a very practical, and I may be wrong, but a very practical point of view. If you're Oliver Ekman-Larsson and you can now pick wherever you want to go in the league, why are you picking the Coyotes? You know what I mean? And maybe John's argument is, yeah, he's been through a lot of pain here. He can now see where it's headed, and who knows? Maybe they get a downtown arena between now and free agency. But as I look at the situation right now and how the team is kind of spinning its wheels a little bit and doesn't spend a ton of money historically, if I'm Ekman-Larsson, man, I'm walking and I'm cashing in elsewhere. And if that's the case, like John Chaika is a pretty practical person. If he realizes that's where it's happening, a year from now, then you can't let the guy walk for nothing. So I'm going to pick trade.
The correct answer is they will relocate because you spoke to them. That is the correct answer. But no, that was a good one too. I like what you said.
John, and as a follow-up, John Tavares. Just for this requires no journalistic integrity, by the way, Craig. We're just asking.
Number will he wear in Toronto?
I think John Tavares. I think that arena news is huge for him, and I think he was personally. I think he was looking for an excuse to sign the Islanders. He's a loyal dude, and part of him wants to see it through. I'm sure with the team that drafted him. So I think if they've shown enough progress. Now they've got this arena announcement. Money in term is not going to be an issue at all. I think ultimately he signs with the Islanders, but that's changed. I was in he's walking camp a few months ago.
Unfortunately, I think I agree with you.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. Well, Craig, it has been an absolute pleasure, and I hope we get to do this again soon. And I promise we won't put you off as much as we did the first time.
I don't promise that.
That's good. I appreciate you guys having me on. I appreciate all the help.
The book is called Behind the Bench, Inside the Minds of Hockey's Greatest Coaches, forwarded by the one and only Sidney Crosby. Craig Custance, thank you so much for being on the Steve Dangle podcast.
Thanks, guys.